Welcome to Global Harmonization Initiative webinar series. I'm Dr. Diana Bogiva, and I'm having the pleasure and privilege to moderate this webinar on food and consumer perception related to labeling, regulation, and quality standards. Labeling and quality standards, as you know, are part of food regulation and legislation, and they are very important aspects of whether consumers choose to purchase food products or not. Food labeling as a tool can influence the consumer perceptions of quality and in turn their food choices. There are many aspects that we are going to discuss, and the same applies when new food products such as plant-based meat alternatives are trying to win space on the consumer plate. Please let's welcome together our amazing speaker, Carrie Allen, Vice President in Business Development and Strategy of the Food Industry Association in the United States, and Dr. Isabella Nyambayo, Assistant Professor at Food Science and Nutrition at Coventry University, United Kingdom. Also, I have to thank our GHI webinar team, including Dr. Nicola Stanley, our GHI Communication Director, and Dr. Gerhard Schlenning, who has many roles in GHI, but today he's helping with the technical part of the webinar. Thank you, ICC, for providing the webinar platform. I would like also to welcome all of you being part of our terrific audience. Together we'll immerse ourselves into the world of food and consumer perception, labeling, regulation, and quality standards. Please ask as many questions possible. And let's start with our first speaker today, Carrie Allen, Vice President, Business Development and Strategy, Division of Food Industry Association in the United States, who will be talking about consumers and food safety certification standards. Over to you, Carrie.
Thanks very much for the intro. I really appreciate the opportunity to present today and to inform the audience about harmonized food safety standards for certification and consumer perceptions of them. The system for managing food safety is multi-layered and very complex. In fact, I had to draw a 2-page diagram for my parents to help explain what I do for my job. And when consumers go into the grocery store, when you walk into the grocery store, are you really questioning that what you buy that day will make you sick? And I think for the most part, I guess the answer is no. But you're likely more conscious of food safety in your own kitchen when you're opening the package and maybe trying to avoid making a mess on the countertop. Consumer perceptions of food safety revolve around trust in the retailer and the perceptions of where they themselves have control for keeping food safe. Today, I'll share a few insights from consumer research and information on the standards practiced in the food supply chain that are happening sort of outside of consumer awareness. I'll review the intent and the drivers of adoption for these standards and the oversight structure and development process for these standards. And finally, I'll share a few strategies for communicating food safety commitment to create consumers who are knowledgeable partners in food safety. According to this survey conducted by FMI, 54% of consumers say they rely on themselves for keeping food safe. And consumers have a high awareness and expectation of the government's role in food safety as well. Food stores rank third for who consumers expect to keep food safe. The processors and farmers who are actually managing food safety every day, instilling safe handling behaviors and managing kill step processes, sanitizing equipment and keeping records, to keep it simple, they are actually held to lower expectations for food safety by consumers. Over half of consumers believe that food safety really is a top priority for industry. But only half of consumers believe that food companies would not knowingly produce unsafe food. That means the other half think that food companies might knowingly produce unsafe food. And less than half believe that the food industry is transparent about the safety of foods. These data indicate there is a gap in consumer knowledge of food safety standards, and education is key in increasing that consumer trust. And consumers' awareness of food safety comes in the forms of warnings of recalls and foodborne illness related to contaminated foods and mislabeling. These negative outcomes naturally impact perceptions of the food industry and undermines consumers' confidence in their own ability to control food safety. Trust is placed in retailers to ensure that unsafe products are kept off the shelf, but how do retailers uphold that trust? Independent verification of suppliers to common standards has become a baseline expectation for major brands, smaller brands, and retailers' private labels for themselves for selling any product at retail. Independently developed standards and certification are the foundation for retailers to manage supply chain risk. But before I get into detail on that, I just want to make a quick introduction of the organization I work for to give you some context of my professional interest and perspective. I am part of the Safe Quality Food Institute. I manage a team of representatives who are positioned around the globe that support retailers and food manufacturers as they work to adopt food safety standards in their supply chain or for their own facilities. And at SQFI, we help these businesses, retailers, associations, and suppliers develop strategies for solving their food safety challenges to help increase assurance within their supply chain and confidence among their trading partners, but also with consumers. SQFI manages a GFSI benchmarked, globally recognized certification program called the SQF Food Safety Certification. It was originally developed in Australia in the 1990s by the Australian Food Safety Authority and together with stakeholders from the industry. And this was done to establish common standards for food safety management. FMI then acquired SQF in 2003, which has grown to more than 12,000 certified sites globally. FMI, the Food Industry Association, supports the industry in a broad range of government relations, education, workforce, and market issues. SQF brings value to the FMI retail and brand owner members by building trust in the supply chain for brand and consumer protection. I mentioned that SQF is a GFSI benchmark certification program. The Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, is an international coalition of stakeholders. They have the mission of safe food for people everywhere. It is owned by the Consumer Goods Forum, and the board and steering committee are made up of food safety and quality leaders from retailers and food brand owners. GFSI's working groups establish harmonized requirements against which certification programs are benchmarked. So these benchmarked programs are deemed equivalent to each other, so that regardless of which program a supplier chooses for certification, they can have confidence it will be accepted by retailers and buyers who require a GFSI program. This harmonization is intended to reduce the number of audits required in the supply chain with the potential to eliminate additional redundant audits from each of the supplier's customers. The wide variety of stakeholders and influences on the standards themselves requires a system of continuous improvement. Revisions and standards are driven by many things, including new technologies, emerging hazards, different trends and management principles, changes in regulations, international reference standards such as ISO and Codex, and the influences of business associations and consumers also contribute to necessary updates of the benchmarking requirement. As the benchmarking criteria are updated, the certification program owners, otherwise known as CPOs or scheme owners, such as SQFI, must revise and submit their programs for re-benchmarking. This process ensures that standards are kept current and incorporate evolving needs, emerging issues, and it really involves all stakeholders. And this re-benchmarking process occurs approximately every 3 to 5 years, depending on the nature of changes to those benchmarking criteria. The GFSI Benchmarking Committee reviews and approves revised standards for continuing recognition. So GFSI, the CPOs, and the accreditation bodies manage integrity programs to ensure consistency in application of the requirements and competency of the resources involved in the certification process. There are multiple layers involved in the oversight and the governance involved in ensuring integrity of the accredited third-party certification system. As you can see from this diagram, this is a version of what I showed my parents. Accreditation bodies and the GFSI are members of the International Accreditation Forum Multilateral Recognition Agreement, or the IAF-MLA. This agreement ensures the constituent members that certification and accreditation will be accepted as mutually equivalent among their international trading partners. GFSI monitors CPOs of scheme owners like SQF to ensure that they are operating according to defined integrity program requirements. Certification bodies manage their own integrity process for maintenance of auditors and staff competency, how they handle complaints and appeals, management of suspension, withdrawals of certified sites if that is necessary, depending on what kind of compliance issues are going on with a certified operation. In addition to third-party certification, some companies continue to audit their suppliers with private standards related to specific quality and food safety requirements. And these private standards are very custom to their proprietary product or process. And while these second-party or private standards may add value to the buyer, the results are not transparent and there is no independent oversight mechanism. The governance mechanism I've described here provides assurance that all findings are noted and corrected and the individuals performing the audit are qualified for the process they are evaluating. And the certified status is publicly available, and the reports are provided to the buyers for full review, so the buyer has transparency in terms of what compliance issues the site dealt with during the certification audit process. GFSI recognized third-party programs include standards for farming, processing, distribution, manufacture of packaging, as well as brokerage. I've provided the examples of the recognized certification program owners here on this slide. Some of these programs focus primarily on agriculture, such as Global Gap, while others deal solely with manufacturing, which, for example, BRC. With SQF's program, for example, it is organized with separate codes for each sector, covering from agriculture for produce and livestock through manufacturing of food and packaging, storage and distribution as well. The most important part of the certification audit itself is the auditor. CPOs, or scheme owners like SQF, license certification bodies and approve qualified auditors to carry out the certification audits. Auditors must have several years' experience with food safety responsibility and experience in the specific food category where they are approved to audit. Prior auditing experience is required, and that experience may come in the form of supplier audits, corporate internal auditing of the corporate entity's own production facilities, other third-party audits, and new auditors are supervised by the certification body for a period of time prior to final approval to audit against a GFSI benchmark program. A talented auditor really has the ability to put people at ease, constructively discuss objective evidence. They are able to explain their auditing process, the findings, and interpretation of standards. And being an auditor is a very challenging career that requires frequent travel, long days in processing environments or outdoors on farms, requires excellent interpersonal and communication skills, and developing expertise through visiting a wide variety of sites and observing complex operations helps to establish a talented auditor as a valued resource to the certification body and to certified sites who rely on a fair and thorough audit. The skills developed working as an auditor opens doors to future leadership positions, and making a commitment mid-career to work as a food safety auditor is challenging and rewarding, but can also be a stepping stone to opportunities that otherwise might not be available. So like I mentioned before, the auditor is truly an important piece of the certification audit process, and it's a challenge for all certification bodies and organizations trying to hire auditors for themselves, that there is a shortage of auditors in the market now. Auditors visit sites around the world, assessing food safety on farm, in food plants, and at distribution centers, also ingredient manufacturers. And the food safety audits are approximately 2.5 days on average. The site is required to make available all areas of the facility for observation, regardless of whether certain areas or products are within the scope of certification. All areas must be disclosed for observation by the auditor. And the facility must also provide the auditor with floor plans, maps of the properties, all documents and records related to the system compliance. And the auditor spends about half of the audit time evaluating the implementation of the system physically through interviewing employees, observing operations, assessing the facility condition inside and out. All shifts and activities must be observed, including sanitation processes. The auditor samples records to audit against the documented procedures and verifies that all hazards have been identified and that control measures are appropriate and effectively being monitored. Shipping and receiving records are assessed, and supplier monitoring procedures are verified, just to name a few of the activities that the auditor carries out. The audit process evaluates the effectiveness of the system and its implementation. A thorough audit results in discovery of nonconformances, which provides the opportunity for the site to correct and improve the system. This is a value to the site. An audit with no findings really brings no value. Certification is granted to a site once all findings have been resolved and the certification body approves all of the evidence of the audit report, the findings, and the corrective action evidence. Unannounced audits are required at least once every 3 years, but some sites may volunteer for unannounced audits every year. This brings added value to the organization who can show this commitment to their buyers. Retailers ask for GFSI certification in order to simplify supplier management with consistent requirements and evaluation. A GFSI benchmark certification program is achievable for many types of operations, not just the more complex and sophisticated operations, but even simple one-product operations up to very large and complex with dozens of processes and products. The standards are written to be adaptable to many different types of operations. Suppliers evaluate and choose the program that best suits their organization's management system and culture. Implementation of GFSI benchmark certification programs prepares suppliers to better manage operational risks, but when incidents do occur, certified sites are able to respond and recover more effectively. And this is important for retailers, for brand protection, and for stability in their supply chains. Many retailers will create a risk ranking system to determine the appropriate activities necessary for managing supply chain risk. Private label products are required to be produced by a certified supplier, given the increased level of risk to the retailer's business and brand for private label products. National brand consumer packaged goods carry their own brand risk, and they often will choose a GFSI recognized standard for certification as part of their internal control mechanisms, and also to provide assurance to their trading partners. Smaller suppliers with low distribution reach may not be required to have a certification, but often are required to at least provide an audit report demonstrating basic GMPs. However, small suppliers of high-risk products or mid-sized suppliers with constrained resources and limited training are a higher risk to retailers and brand owners. So therefore, these suppliers may be subject to increased requirements for a third-party certification program as well. Requesting a common standard for certification across suppliers simplifies supplier management and demonstrates due diligence in consumer protection. From the supplier's perspective, certification is good for overall business performance due to the sort of halo effect of implementing a program that drives positive business culture of employee engagement and accountability. Managing the operation according to defined standards results in more consistent products, fewer consumer complaints, and reduced costs related to product failure. Maintaining compliance with a certification standard also maintains readiness for regulatory visits. All of these positive benefits do lead to expanded market access with retailers who require a third-party certification for products sold in their stores. The process for certification is very similar among the various benchmark programs. Ideally, the site will have a system that already partially meets the requirements, and the major effort is applied to training and filling the gaps to meet the standard of choice. If the site is an early stage developing supplier, they may use the standard as the framework for building their food safety program from the ground up. The entire management team and site staff are critical to the functioning of an effective food safety program. When properly engaged, it results in a positive food safety culture of responsibility and accountability. And food safety culture has been a major focus of the GFSI benchmark requirements for the past several years because it's found that organizations with really strong positive food safety culture tend to have better performance in terms of meeting retailers' expectations for food safety. A fully implemented system is audited by the selected CB, and certification is granted when full conformance is verified after closure of any issues identified during the audit. GFSI benchmark standards must comprise some common elements, but may differ in their approach for implementation or design requirements for specific risks. The standards must address good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, and documented policies and procedures with records maintained that demonstrate monitoring of continuous compliance according to the procedures. Management commitment and food safety culture are important elements for ensuring total company commitment to food safety as a top priority. The HACCP-based food safety plan, hazard analysis and critical control point, is documented to identify all hazards and to manage the risks associated with the hazards, depending on the products and the processes involved in the food being produced. Supplier management and allergen controls are very important elements of the food safety system, as these programs help control hazards that are common sources of food recalls. It also helps to control hazards and reduce that risk of recall. Internal audit programs are required to systematically review the site's conformance to its own policies and procedures. An effective internal audit will uncover violations or opportunities for improvement and results in corrective and preventive action. Sites with an effective internal auditing system tend to perform significantly better in the certification audit than sites who do not conduct an effective internal audit. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, consumers rely on themselves for keeping their food safe, despite the complex layers of food safety management employed before the food even reaches their kitchen. Sharing information about food safety culture and commitment may increase consumers' trust in their favorite brands and favorite stores. And while food safety is not a competitive issue, consumers may develop loyalty for brands who arm them with knowledge to better serve themselves. And consumers do have control over food safety outcomes by several means from the moment that the product is placed in their grocery cart. And the efforts to maintain this food safety in this last mile from the store to the consumer's home are in the hands of the consumer, and they have indicated that there is room for food companies to be more transparent about food safety. Clearly communicating proper handling, storage, ingredient, and shelf life information clearly demonstrates this shared responsibility. Communicating positive information about food safety and educating consumers on safe practices are strategies for establishing trust and consumer confidence. Some examples: transparent supplier expectations have positioned many retailers as forward-thinking leaders driving change for the food industry. So many retailers have a section on their website for supplier expectations that is open to the public to read, so that consumers know what the expectations are for the suppliers who are providing product on shelf. Some retailers implement in-store food safety systems to manage food safety in their food prep areas or maybe their receiving areas, and implement a whole management system around that, the continued safety of the product that's brought into the store and any foods that are prepared within the store. Some retailers also provide educational materials within the store around food safety, and demonstrating responsiveness to feedback or consumer complaints or comments regarding food safety or product quality is viewed positively by consumers. Manufacturers who formulate allergen-controlled products and label allergens clearly and consistently create a broader and really fiercely loyal consumer base for those manufacturers. Those are just some examples of the way that retailers and manufacturers can help communicate food safety information to consumers and build their trust. While consumers are not generally aware of or giving credit to the industry for their food safety efforts, there are benefits to increasing awareness. Awareness of food safety standards in the supply chain can increase an overall understanding of the food system, the benefits of processing, and an appreciation for the food safety profession. Increased awareness and diligence in maintaining transparent supplier standards can uphold trust in brands and retailers. I hope that this presentation has provided you with information that you did not already know about food safety standards, or maybe help to clarify some points about the process. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present on this topic, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. This was really informative. There are many questions. I first will start with expressing that I really like the idea of a scheme or a figure you draw for your parents to understand the complexity of your job. If you need to draw another one to describe why do we need food safety standards to the consumers, what you would draw there in this scheme?
Yeah, if I were to draw a diagram for why we need food safety standards for consumers, well, certainly to protect public health, to reduce the number of illnesses related to food safety, foodborne illnesses, mislabeling, allergen controls. It is really all about reducing the total number of individuals who are impacted by food safety incidents.
Part of the food standards are food labeling. What is the importance of food labeling from a consumer perspective?
Well, the food labels communicate a lot of information to the consumer. So there's all the ingredients, all of the allergens, whether or not the product is bioengineered, depending on which country you're in, there's some requirements around that, where the product was manufactured, where the ingredients came from. There's many different labeling rules depending on which jurisdiction you're in. But for the consumer's point of view is to educate them on, is this product good for me? Front of package, obviously, that's the marketing landscape on the front of that package, but there's more information really being placed on the front of the package about the product origins, nutritional content, because the consumers want that information front and center to help them make a choice instead of having to read the fine print on the back of the package. So it serves many purposes. The labels, front and back, has a lot more detail depending on which side you're looking at. But main point of the whole package is for informing the consumer about will that product be a good one for them.
There are two more questions about labeling. Labels provide warnings and important information about the way to use a product, for example, storage and cooking instructions. How important are labels in ensuring the safety of its consumers?
Labels are very important for ensuring the safety of consumers, particularly around how to handle that product when it's in the home. For example, freeze or use by instructions. What temperature?
Or probably how long to cook it.
Right, exactly. How long and what temperature to cook it to. Awareness around what allergens are present, so people can be careful about cross-contact in the event that they have an allergen-sensitive person in their house. So yeah, lots of information on that package around food safety.
and how the consumer's perceptions could be used as guidelines by the food industry or the regulators to improve food safety or food labeling design or anything that is related to consumers.
Yeah, I think consumer research into how they interpret information on packages, because companies do it in different ways. Cooking instructions, for example, require a lot of interpretation by the consumer sometimes, what a use-by date means. So incorporating consumers into the process of developing your package so you understand how they interpret the language on there is a really important thing to do to keep them included in that process.
And one last question, what is your perspective on how we can digitalize quality standards and regulations?
Well, so the digital world, the landscape incorporates a lot of different things in terms of managing food safety. So from traceability perspective of knowing the origins of some of the raw materials that went into that product, what countries different things came from. So you know what different hazards and risks there might be depending on that supply chain.
And the provenance probably of food as well.
Exactly, yeah. And then maintenance of storage, of records and documentation at particular sites for management of their quality management system. Electronic record keeping helps for retrieval of information quickly. It helps for tracking and trending things that might be going on within the facility in terms of process control or deviations in quality parameters. So there's a lot of digital tools out there for use in terms of traceability and quality management records. Retailers will use a lot of database systems to collect and control information about all their suppliers so they can have quick access to their own suppliers' conformance, certified status, manage trends in different types of issues going on with non-conformances across their supply chain by different product categories. So technology is absolutely critical in food safety management for sure, and quality management. There's just so many different ways to use it, though. I couldn't possibly describe that in 5 minutes. And of course, I'm not an expert in all things technology, but I do appreciate the question because it is very important.
Thank you very much, Carrie. There probably will be other questions coming up your way. But thanks again for your very, very informative presentation. Carrie Ireland, Vice President, Business Development and Strategy at the Food Industry Association in the United States.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Isabella Lambaio, an assistant professor of food science and nutrition from Coventry University, United Kingdom, who will be talking about plant-based meat alternatives regulation and legislations, a hard nut to crack. Over to you, Isabella.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And today I'm going to talk about plant-based meat alternative regulations and legislations. And I think my colleague has actually been talking about food safety and how consumers really understand that angle of making sure that the products that land in their table are safe to eat. I am going to look at the side of the production side, the food industry, as well as how our governments that make these regulations and legislations, how prepared are they to meet the fast-moving technology and innovation that we have, and also the pressures of climate change, which are forcing most of the food industries to be innovative and come up with new products. So if you can look at the picture that I have here, I've got the picture of a dog looking at the plant at the burger, which we are not quite sure whether it's a plant burger or it's a beef burger, but I think this dog is really much into developing this burger. But let's see what are the regulations and legislations that are around meat alternatives. I'll look at what are meat alternatives, the challenges of plant-based meat alternatives, the risks of plant substitutes, and also what is known about the regulations that are there in Europe, USA, as well as United Kingdom. What are the conventional protein sources? Meat from animals, dairy from animals, eggs from animals, fermented and cultured products, as well as plants which are from pulses. And all these are conventional protein sources that we've been using before and are well known within the community. So what is the rationale of looking into plant-based meat alternatives? These plant-based meat alternatives are perceived to be sustainable, saving in water, saving in energy, and also saving in land usage. They are also perceived by consumers to be healthy, low in fat, and low in cholesterol. And there are also another angle that have come up with this new generation of lifestyle. Some have become veganism, some have become activism, where they're looking at the animal welfare. So all this has actually been putting pressure on the food industry to be innovative and use new methods of production to come up with plant-based meat alternatives. And then on the other part, the population is growing. The land is not enough to be producing enough food for everybody. Hence, there is the risk of food and nutrient insecurity. And to make sure that we have got enough food, the food system has also turned back to plant-based meat alternatives as a way of addressing food and nutrient insecurity. And then there are some people who are intolerant to lactose. They also want to look at plant-based alternatives as a way of getting their proteins. The other thing that has also come up is that when you look at the life cycle of plants, growing them and harvesting them and putting them in the plate, their life cycle is shorter than the life cycle of an animal. So that again was also compromising the availability of animal protein sources as opposed to the plant-based sources. But with all this in mind, they always come with their own challenges. So one of the alternatives that we can have, or that are actually available to the community, we can use pulses as a way of getting our proteins from on day-to-day daily diet, edible insects. We can also have plant-based beverages, plant-based dairy and cultured products. We can also have plant-based eggs, cultured meat, which can be stem cells or microbes or algae, or we can even have cultured fish. So all these are alternative protein sources that has actually been lending into our market through innovative technologies of either processing of foods as well as coming up with new ways of shortening the life cycle of animal protein generation. So what are the raw ingredients of these plant-based substitutes, right? These are pulses that are already in the market: legumes, cereals, nuts, seeds, pseudo-cereals, fruits, vegetables, or even plants. So these, we actually see them in the market. We actually meet them in our gardens. And at times, we actually, when we travel from area to area, we actually see them being used as sources of food. So these are not products that are new to us, but it is because that additional technology that have been used to process them into another product, which has actually brought about this part of actually being called a novel product. So what are the terminologies that is actually been used? You can actually see that they can be called a novel food or ingredient, meat or protein substitutes, meat or protein analogs, meat or protein alternatives, meat or protein imitants, and at times some products are labeled as meatless meat. So these novel products that we're talking about, according to the regulation of EU 2015 number 2283, which was repealing the previous regulation of 258 which was established in 1997. A novel product is a food that had not been consumed to a significant degree by humans in EU before 15 May 1996. So what we are actually seeing here is the definition of a novel product is actually telling us that we are actually not looking at something that is very new, but it has not been consumed in that area in a significant degree. So the EU legislation is actually applicable to food, which is also novel, to be placed in the market within the Union, including novel products imported from third countries. And then these foods, for them to be consumed, to be used in EU, they also should show history of safe food use in these areas where they've been used before. And they are looking at safe history of safe use of at least 25 years as part of a customary diet of a significant number of people. So you see that we are actually looking at it and say, this is quite new. But if you look at the EU itself, EU is actually telling you that, no, this is not a new thing. But the application of technology to come up with the new products is the one that they are actually regulating. Right. So what we are saying is that the EU have got actually a list of these novel food products which are accepted by the Union as food that should be put or should be used by companies in the market. What we actually want to realize here is that we talk about these foods as cereals, pulses, and all the stuff. But when EU lists these ones there, I will encourage you to actually to visit that website. The EU actually lists them as the most ingredient that is in that product, which is bringing about the functionality of that product, is what is actually listed. Like, for example, if lecithin is the one that is in a pulse that is actually bringing about emulsification, is the lecithin that is actually put in the novel product Union list, but they do not put the pulse. So this is one of the things that we need to kind of like be aware of, like when as we're looking at food production, as we're looking at ingredients. When you are putting an ingredient in your product, what is it that the functional part that you are putting it for? You're putting it in for as an emulsifier. You're putting it in for as an uncracking agent. And that part that causes that in the product is the one that is listed in the Union list. So the global markets of meat emitters, they're actually growing. Plant-based sector in Europe has increased by almost 59% between 2018 and 2020. And by sector, you said the plant-based beverages has actually grown a lot in Denmark, France, and Austria. And the meat emitters has grown much in Netherlands and Belgium. And then if you look at globally, it's growing in value as well. And they are even estimating or projecting that by 2027, it will actually be millions and millions of pounds of dollars that it will be actually putting into the food sector. So it is a potential alternative to meat, and it has got a lot of support and also a lot of value within the market. But there are some things that they actually come up with. Like what I'm saying, that it's not a new market. If you would actually go to some certain areas and actually say, I'm actually going to be advertising insects as a way of an alternative product, we're like, insects. We've been eating insects since. So what is new about the insects, right? So it's making sure that these products has got organoleptic properties for those who are new to them, which are also kind of like similar to the animal-based foodstuffs, and then the appearance and all flavor and texture, which is also imitating the products that they are trying to replace on the market. And then in the process of doing that, they still should be environmentally economic, friendly, and still maintain good health benefits to the consumer. So you'd see that if you look at the traditional alternative products, beverages, fermented products, cheese and substitutes, they are all products that are there. And the part that I want to highlight here is the country of our origin, right? Soya milk, soybean, China, right? It's one of the countries that has actually started it to bring it into the market. So it's not something that has just started, but it's now looking at what the Chinese has actually been doing to this soya milk, to actually now look at and say, how can we put it into other markets so that they can be acceptable? And then you can look at another product, which is seitan, which is from wheat, again, China, and then tofu from China. So it's there. And then there is maheu, which is from South America. And then there is boza, which is wheat, or maize from maize, wheat, or millet, or barley. And this is from Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, or even Egypt. So you see that the countries where these products have been used, it's a mix of different regions that we can actually resource from and also learn from them. But what are the challenges that are actually there, right, of this plant-based meat alternative? What we are saying is there are too many ingredients which needs to actually be made to be generally regarded as safe before they can actually be used in a product. There is also an issue of allergens. There's also an issue of food and nutrient insecurity, which is brought about by anti-nutrient factors. And there is the issue of processing technologies. These are all things that need legislation and regulation. So when we look at it, these meat imiters, we actually see that there is, if you are looking at the proteins, they need to, the sources, like what I was saying, wheat, soya, pea, lentil. But what we are looking at here, they bring in texture, they are binders, they bring in base for the substitute, and they're also used as emulsifiers. So when you add these proteins into the product, they are bringing in more than one functionality of the ingredient into the product than just being known as just a wheat product that we eat. So this multifunctionality of this product is the one that is also making the industry really very much interested in saying that if we cannot rear the meat or rear the animal for 6 months or 1 year, how can we actually turn to these products and make products which are of shorter life cycle and as well as healthier? So when you look at the meat imitators ingredients, here I've just come up with a burger, all right? The burger ingredients, beef, 82%, onion, water, rice, flour, salt, yeast, and then if you look at the plant burger, it has got all these ingredients that are listed, including even allergens at times. And then if you look at the second one as well, the list is even longer, right, in those ingredients. So you'd actually see that there's this challenge of trying to make sure that the ingredients list is shorter and the products are not expensive to produce. So when you look at the dairy imiters, that's what actually there again, they're looking at emulsifying, acidifying agents, sweeteners, as well as preservatives that are all being put in there from plant sources to make sure that they imitate the texture and the appearance and everything of the dairy milk. So what is the challenges of the food industry or the sector? Prerequisites, documentation, standard operation procedure, general manufacturing practices, general hygiene practice, the HACCP, cleaning in place after production. What are the proteins, levels of proteins, carbohydrates, fats that are in these products, and which type of chemicals that are actually required to clean these production lines so that they are safe. And then supplier due diligence, certification and analysis of all these raw ingredients. If you look at that burger, we are looking at each raw ingredient and going through all these paperwork for certification. And then the processing techniques, the drying, the sorting, the soaking, the dehulling, the slicing, they are all additional processing techniques that are put in there, which are very much in line with making sure that the product is safe. And some of them are already being done, but some of them are actually an additional cost to the original product that is actually there. Then when you look at ISO standards, my colleague was talking about all the BRC, how BRC is actually linked with manufacturing and all the stuff. They are really published all these ISO standards in terms of quality management system, food safety management systems, environmental management systems, and even the life cycle assessment. So these are all standards that when you look at that meat alternative, it needs to actually go through that. And then the ingredients and packaging, they also need to make sure that they are actually safe. And then the packaging itself, you have got the packaging for each and every ingredient that is actually going into that food product. So which means it's actually coming in with a lot of other additional packaging to make sure that the ingredients are safe before they're actually put into the product. And then the life assessment of this product, there's not much documentation that has been done on the meatless product, but there is a lot that has been done on individual plant products. For example, what is the life assessment of grapes if they're being eaten as raw? That documentation and information is there, but there is not much that has been done. Is what is the life assessment life cycle assessment of a vegan burger. So you'd see that that information still needs to come in and actually say, if we are claiming that they are environmental friendly, in which way that we are looking at land, we are looking at water usage, we are looking at carbon dioxide emissions. But if you look at the whole life cycle of it, taking into consideration the raw ingredients that have gone in there, the processing that has gone in there, the packaging that has gone in there, is this still going to be a sustainable product? And then if you look at insects, food allergies and intolerances, there's a lot of things that people are actually kind of like looking at and say, how do we move away from it? And these insects and plants that are meat alternatives, they bring about these allergies and function. And then if you look at food and nutrient security, where a novel product is intended to replace another product, it should not differ from that food in a way that would nutritionally less advantageous to the consumer. So what we are saying is these plant-based meat alternatives should not disadvantage the consumer. But what we are saying here is the plant-based ingredients has got what are called the anti-nutrient factors in them, which can interfere with calcium, which can interfere with zinc, magnesium, and iron absorption. By doing that, which means the bioavailability of these minerals to the consumer will not be facilitated during the consumption of those plant-based diets. Therefore, the anti-nutrients that are in these plant-based alternatives needs to be deactivated to a point where they should not interfere with the absorption of calcium, zinc, magnesium, and iron. They also should not interfere with the protein, because we are using them because we're actually saying they've got protein that is enough to replace the protein that is coming from an animal. But if the anti-nutrients that is in these foods are actually going to interfere with protein absorption, then the whole project becomes counterintuitive. Therefore, the processes that are actually done to process these plant-based meats should be done efficiently to make sure that the anti-nutrient factors within the plant-based nutrients has been deactivated and they would not interfere with protein absorption. So if you look at these anti-nutrients that I'm talking about, which could actually bring about food and nutrient insecurity to us, phytates, lecithin, oxalic acids, enzyme inhibitors, tannins, and saponins. And all these are actually found in a lot of legumes, seeds, leafy vegetables, and the plant alternative substitute, soya drinks, oat drinks, cashew drinks. And so they can actually be in a number of products that we can meet, where we are actually eating or drinking the product, thinking we are getting the thing, and they're coming in and interfering with protein absorption or mineral absorption, and hence you can end up with nutrient deficiency when actually a person is eating a balanced diet. But because these anti-nutrients are interfering with absorption of minerals and absorption of protein, it can actually be a long-term side effect if a person is only relying on plant-based products. So the processes that has been put there to improve these plant-based initiatives, they're looking at defetting, dehulling, roasting, and all these use protein isolates. They're also for flavor making and solid phase micro extraction. So they are all techniques and processes that have been put in place to make sure that the anti-nutrients are taken care of. And then if you look at now the cost of production, we are actually saying that these plants in the natural history of diet, they are usually consumed on their own. But now we want to turn them into a plant-based meat alternative. We are now coming in with all these additional legislation, additional production cost. This is actually can make the plant-based production of food be very unsustainable in terms of the legislation itself for all those ingredients and regulation, the ingredients cost, the cost of packaging, and also some of the companies that's actually been folding after citing soaring costs and operation disruptions. So you might actually see that you can understand where these companies are coming from, because the ingredients and legislations that are actually required to meet to make this food safe, they can actually be a burden to the company in terms of cost. And then you tend to see that in terms of consumer acceptance of the product, they are leaning towards being a flexitarian and also using unprocessed plant products as opposed to the processed ones. So there's also this balance that needs to be made to make sure that the consumers' needs are actually met. So if you look at the acceptance of what actually makes the consumers accept these products, what are the motives? Taste, environment, health, and at times attitude towards these products, and at times the social norm. All right. In my area, there is not much protein that is coming from animals, so we resort to insects. Right? It's very normal, and everybody knows that there's a season for insects, there's a season for animals to be used as protein sources. And there's also other things, like, for example, if you look at algae, food neophobia, familiarity with the product, and if you look at also insects, fear and disgust can actually affect the consumer acceptance of some of these products. And then if you look at cultured meat, familiarity, and some people feel like it's inappropriate to actually have a meat that is coming from a stem cell, and some feel that there's a bit of disgust that comes from it, and then trusting that have all the chemicals that has been used to grow this cultured meat been dealt with, that the product is now actually safe. And some actually deem cultured meat as not natural. So these are all things that affect consumer acceptance of these alternatives. So if I'm going to look at one case study of a novel product, this one here is called 3-fucosyl lactose, and it's fermented from genetically modified strains of E. coli, the K12 and the BL21. The interesting part about this product is that it's a component which is almost similar to human milk. So it's actually being very much used in a number of as an ingredient in a number of products. For example, the infant milk, the follow-on formula. It's also being used for food for special medical purposes, also used for total diet replacements, weight control, and also in food supplements. And all this, where it's actually been used, you actually see that there will be regulations that is actually being required to meet that. So if you look at the EU regulations of this product, the target population, they say, is general population, because it ranges from infants to weight management, which is in the adult. But let's look at the legislation of this product, if it is going to be used to all this general population. All right, it has to be first regulated as a novel product. So it has to meet the requirements of the EC 2015-2283 regulation. If it is going to be used in infant formula and follow-on formula, it has to meet the regulation EU 2016 number 127. And if it is going to be used as supplement for special food, it needs to actually meet the regulation 2016 128. And if it is going to be put into products for total diet replacement for weight control, it has to meet the regulation EU 2017 number 1798. So you see that there are all these regulations that is just going to one novel product. For each to actually be satisfying all these, it has to go through all this. And all these are costs that are being put to companies, and there are additional costs that companies need to actually meet to make sure that they can be in a position to use this novel product in all these products as an ingredient. And then if you are just going to put them in a beverage or even any other dairy products or cereals, they also need to meet the regulation is EC 178, which was established in 2002. So you tend to see that all these things are draining the company resources, and also I'm not quite sure whether they can actually, the government could actually intervene in terms of looking at how we do not want them to shortchange the safety part of the product, but the legislation and regulations can actually be something that is death by legislation or death by regulation, but at the end, the values and positive input that this product is bringing into the market might actually be outweighed. So if you look at its production processes, they would look at good manufacturing processes. They need to put in the HACCP plan. They need to put production processes and processing aids for the raw material, unit operation, and even filter aids to make sure that all the E. coli that has been put in there has actually been deactivated or been removed from the product. And then there's the food safety system certification that needs to be made sure that it's also met. So there is a lot that actually goes in legislation and regulation that might even be very much negative in terms of producing these novel products. So let's take the example of this one here. This product was first discovered in October, or an application of it was actually made in October 2021. And then in March 2022, they received a review of the documentation, and then they were asked to put any additional information, which they submitted in March 2023. And then in April 2023, they now have considered listing this product as a novel product on the EU regulation EC 2015-2283. So you see that it's just a process of one legislation. If you look at all those legislation that it needs to go through, this, by the time they actually finish or pass all these regulations, at times they've lost the interest probably of the product at all. So you might actually say that these are some of the challenges that are there in terms of these plant-based alternatives, or looking at the novel products as putting them into the market. Let's look at the legislation and the regulation that is being followed, or that is there to support the food industry in America. We actually say that between 2018 and 2021, the plant-based alternative market grew by 54%. It's doing great, right? But the production and innovation has actually not grown rapidly. So it's like someone who is looking through the window, seeing a plant growing in the pot, but not knowing how best or what is actually happening to that. So the innovation and technology is growing, but the legislation, the federal regulations are not playing catch up of the rate at which these plant-based products are actually growing. And therefore the labeling is not quite clear on what actually is there. And therefore some companies has been exposed to legal risk due to lack of these federal regulations. Some meat imitants in USA, they were actually based on the meat and the dairy, and could not be regulated under the Federal Meat Inspection Act or Poultry Meat Product Inspection Act because they are not from animals. So what they have actually now done is they've taken these meat imitants and put them on the Federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. And this move that they did is just moved it to there, but there is no information for the industry to actually support them in terms of what is required for them to meet, so that the product that is going in there is actually safe. They have got what are called standards of identities for food. And these ones here, they identify a food like, for example, milk is a lateral secretion practically free from colostrum obtained by complete milking of one or more healthy cows. Almonds does not lactate. Hence, they actually say it does not fit into that standard of identities of food. So where is it actually going to fit, right? So you actually see that the FDA's standard of identities who have to address these gaps that is actually there. But at the moment, there is no information on how the federal government is actually addressing these differences in terms of labeling of the animal-based product as well as the plant-based product. And then the meat imitants labeling in US, because of this gap that is actually been there, you actually see that there has been now some confusion at times that it's coming up to actually say, if it is an imitation, then it's not supposed to be in the market, because you're actually confusing the consumers to say you're selling something that is not real. And then some of the things that actually come up is like the FDA's regulation further needs to require that labeling of imitation to bear the term imitation. So companies are now supposed to make sure that they put that term imitation. But if the moment they put in there, the consumer are actually saying, if I am eating an imitation, so which means you're not selling, you are selling me something that is not what it is. So all this confusion that is actually there, it's bringing all this gap that is between the advancement of technology and the catching up of the federal legislation to make sure that the companies are supported. So if you look at the timeline of it, of the FDA Food and Drug Authority guidance on plant-based alternative labeling, they established the standards of identities for foods in 1939. In 2018, they actually realized there's all this nutrition innovation that is actually coming in and all the stuff. And there was this nutrition innovation strategy that was come up, which looked at it and say, the basis of which these standards of identities that were done in 1939 is now being met now. But they have not come up to say, what is it that needs to be done to make sure that we accommodate these differences in product. So the FDA actually send out some survey to actually find out what people would want. A lot of people were actually saying, we want to adopt the meat, milk, and dairy names, right, into it. But when you are actually doing that, some consumers will actually say, no, that is not. There's no clarity around labeling of the plant-based and the traditional. Am I buying a dairy product, or am I buying it? And all this terminology, the FDA is still need to look at and say, how do we support the industry to make sure that the consumers, when they're in the shop, they are not confused on what they are actually buying. So the FDA now has started working on the labeling of plant-based milk alternatives and voluntary nutrient statement. And this was actually started in 2022, and they have now come up in April 2023. They've now come up with draft guidance on these plant-based alternatives for the industry. But this is only looking at the dairy. So they still need to look at the meat alternatives. They still need to look at the cultured meat. So it's like there's still a lot of gap where we are talking about climate change, we are talking about innovation, we are talking about processing, but I think the governments at times are not moving in time in the same rate at which these products are being produced, and there is a gap that is actually being created between labeling of the food products and also making sure that the people who are being sold this product understand what exactly that they're buying. So what they've done now in America is that different states have actually been coming up with their own labeling laws. But these ones here were actually trying to look at it and say, some of them are actually saying we should not use the word meat, butter, or in the product. And some statutes actually permit qualified labels that they can either be plant-based, vegan, or other language indicating that the food is plant. But some are actually saying, no, we prohibit alternative meat products completely because it's misrepresentative to the consumers, and they are also using a language that is associated with meat plant products. So you see that in different states are using different approaches, and other states are actually criminalizing labeling of foods as meat when the product does not contain any meat or anything from animal at all. So there is these differences that the states are actually saying the federal is not actually coming to do it. As states, let's come out in there and try and support the companies. But this has actually come up in some states, lawsuits against companies or even organizations which are advertising certain products, and they are saying, according to this statutes, it's not supposed to be advertised as that, or according to this. And they can't go to the federal because there is nothing that is actually supporting them. So there's still a lot of gap in terms of how do we label these plant alternatives, which should be recognized globally and which is also accepted globally. And then if you look at the UK legislation and regulation, where the Brexit, we're actually saying we are moving away from the EU, which means that UK is now establishing its own legislation and regulations, and this is being done through the Food Standard Agents, but at the moment it is following the FSA guidelines, and it's also still adopting the EU guidelines until they can actually come up with their own legislation and regulations, which they actually say is applicable to UK. But in UK, they also now have come up with what are called regulated products. In the process of coming out today, they're also saying, we have got novel products. Yes, the list is there, but we have got these products which are also saying they need to be regulated because of the high risk that they pose to the consumer. So they've got feeds, extracted solvents, flavorings, food contact material, which can even include packaging, food additives, food enzymes, genetically modified organisms, novel foods, and even smoke flavorings. They are all products that are being put under regulated products. And they're actually saying you need to make sure that you have applied for it to be listed in the novel product list. And this novel product list is almost similar to the EU one, but you should make sure that your product fits into the definition of this novel product list. And they also have got additional material that they are actually putting on their Food Standards Association Food Standard Agents website to support the companies in terms of making sure that their novel products are listed and they are listed correctly. So when you look at globally in terms of legislation, we are saying a lot of these food ingredients have already been used in different countries, like what I said, China, Spain, Africa, and South America, and even in Northern America. So these regulations and legislations are actually there, which are regulating those products in those areas. And if you look at it in summary, you actually there are some EU regulations which are adopted from novel product. Ingredients must need to pass more than one legislation or regulation listing for it to actually be used as an ingredient of plant-based products. And then if you look at federal regulations, not much clarity is actually there in terms of what the companies are supposed to do, and hence the state statutes are not even consistent within the states themselves. Therefore, this food labeling is ranging from recommended to illegal use of terminology. So there is these things that still needs to be addressed. And then in UK, currently applying the EU regulations and gradually walking away from the EU regulations to make its own legislation. And then globally, the global food laws are the ones that are supposed to be existing for the food laws, but they should consider the shift that is now coming in, like, for example, the identification of anti-nutrient factors, which needs to be taken care of in terms of allergens and in terms of affecting absorption of nutrients and absorption of proteins, and also modern technology as well as innovation. And then if in conclusion, the plant-based alternative excellent protein sources, but the challenge is too many ingredients that are in there which can bring about cost to industries. And then the challenges of these running costs can also bring about even nutrient security, allergens, or even the burden of legislation and regulation. And then there is another part which still needs to be done, which is outstanding, the life assessment of plant-based alternatives, which needs to be done so that when we are saying they are sustainable, they are really sustainable in their holistic approach. And then, yes, thank you so much for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Isabella, for covering all these fascinating and very, very complex aspects of plant-based meat alternatives regulation and legislations. There are a few questions for you, and there are also some more questions that our audience put for Kerry, so I will ask her after that. So your first question is plant-based meat a regulated term?
It depends with where you are actually coming from. If you look at the EU regulation, which is 2015-2283, it is something that they actually take it as a term that they can accept. That's the reason why I actually listed all those ones that a product can be named as protein imitate. It can be protein analog. It can be protein substitute. These are all terminologies that in that legislation are actually accepted as a terminology for protein alternatives.
Any new products faces acceptance risk? You mentioned allergies, but any other health concerns reinforce such risk in relation to food? What industry has to do to help consumers feel confident that all potential health factors are identified and the risk reduced?
Like what we have, the theme that we have now, information on the label. The consumers now are very much educated in terms of using the communication tool of labeling the product. So they need to make sure that the labeling is clear, the labeling is giving as much information to the consumer as possible so that they can make an informed decision in terms of safety. If there is, like for example, there are some companies, even if the ingredient list does not have an allergen in it, they also put a statement and say this product has been made in a factory which has also produced allergens. So it's also kind of like making sure that if there's anyone who has got a risk, they need to note that, in our ingredient list is not there, but the fact that it has been made in a factory where allergens has been present, there is that potential of it being contaminated. So that can actually be something that makes the consumers more confident in terms of making sure that they are being looked after in terms of safety.
So the transparency of ingredients is really important to be listed at the labeling, but very often plant-based meat alternative contain more sodium than animal meats, and this level of content of sodium are not exactly mentioned. So what the regulatory authorities can do these sodium levels to be somehow, put into regulation or legislation?
The companies would need to be transparent by putting traffic lights on their product. If they put traffic lights, then they are supposed to declare how much salt is in there, how much sugar is in there, how much calories is in there. So even when we just look at labeling itself, that should cover the consumer by telling them how much salt is in there. And also, if you look at the legislation of food safety and all the stuff, it's also covered all those ingredients to say all the ingredients that are in the product are supposed to be declared. But you actually see that in some situations, labeling is still optional, it's not mandatory, and hence some companies can actually just decide not to include it because they feel like labeling is not mandatory.
What is the impact of regulation and legislation regarding different alternative proteins? You mentioned insects as well, and cell meats and other products.
There is the FAO has actually been having a discussion, was it in April or May this year, talking about cultured meat and looking at it to actually say how should we regulate it. And then one of the things that we're actually saying in those discussions is that, well, the cultured meat is coming from stem cells, which is meat. So some of the legislation that are being applied to meat should also be applied to this cultured meat, right? But you'd actually see that, yes, some of them can apply, but there is this part of production where we are looking at good agricultural practices for rearing the animal. There is no good agricultural practices for stem cell. So that gap is kind of like they were actually saying, it needs to be taken care of by the ISO standards 9000 series, which talks about the quality management system of the product. But there are legislations which are there, but they are not transferable depending on technologies and even methods of production that has actually been used. So you tend to see that it's even if we say that this legislation for animals, they are not really transferable to that. So there is even still coming up with legislation to say, how do we legislate this cultured meat?
Yeah.
Because there are some gaps that are there.
Yeah, we know that all of us that a couple of days ago, the US-based in California's Upside Foods announced that the company received regulatory approval from US Department of Agriculture for the label of its cell-cultivated chicken, making it the second company in the United States after Just to secure that approval. This was after the regulatory that they received from the US Food and Drug Administrator green light for cultivated meat. So what is the significance of all of these decisions for consumers and for the regulations and for all of these companies that are going to put their new products, doesn't matter if they are cultivated or any other products?
For the consumers is trust and understanding that they're safe. That is what they're concerned about. And then when they look at like what I was saying, that in one of the states it was actually being made illegal to actually say milk imitate, because they're actually saying, why are you selling the consumers an imitation other than the real product? So you would see that those things like that, even the wording itself, the consumer can easily be put off to actually say an imitation. Why can't I have the real thing, right? Although it's like an alternative, it's actually different from if you say I'm selling a substitute, it's different from I'm selling an imitation, because a lot of times an imitation has got negative perception of the product, but a substitute is like, oh yeah, it's something that is almost similar to that, so which means I can actually have whatever I was looking forward in this product, I can also have it in this product because it's a substitute. So
it's
all this
having a connotation of trust.
Yes, it's all connotation of trust, and also bringing the trust that the consumers would look at and say, are we safe, number one, and also are we buying or whatever we are putting on the whatever the money that we are putting on the product, they're actually getting back what we are expecting.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Isabella. And one question for Carrie. How is the discipline of science communication can be engaged in labeling design? People continue asking about labeling.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the discipline of science communication, the science communication area is it takes quite the skill to be able to translate complex information into information that the general consumer is going to digest and understand quickly for their own educational purposes on what they're going to see in the store. I mean, I personally think if retailers can engage with a science communicator, maybe on their own team, or maybe somebody from a university who's a science communicator, to develop materials to display in the stores, or maybe it's on their website, to help consumers understand what the labels mean. And this discussion you were just having about regulations, I mean, in the US, there's all sorts of information on the label, maybe, too much for some, not enough for others. But in different parts of the world, the labeling regulations are just not the same, where they just display information differently. So regardless of where you are, if retailers and food manufacturers take part in that process, employ a science communicator to help them describe their products, describe the nutritional elements of them, why it's important, why does it matter, why is it even there, that type of information is very helpful. And another really great thing that is useful for consumers, because there's so much information on labels, is the smart label. It's a QR code that instead of having all these different badges and information all over the label, there's one thing that the consumer can scan. It takes them directly to the product's website that has the manufacturer can put all the information they want to on that landing page where that QR code scans to, and having a science communicator help with understanding what it is the consumer wants to know and how they receive information and interpret it, I think it would be very useful for the industry to coordinate in that way. So great question.
Yeah. For both of you, last question. Do you think that unification between labeling across countries, across nations, something that could be harmonized as one thing that every single consumer could understand with the same image, with the same message all across the world, is useful to be done?
Go ahead, Isabel.
Yes, I would actually think it should be done, because now we have got a global market. Because of global markets, we need language that can be understood by everybody everywhere. So I think that harmonization of labeling, which can be understood by everyone everywhere, it's a very good thing to implement.
Yeah, thank you. Carrie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it would be wonderful if that can happen. But like what Isabella was describing about the rules state by state within the U.S., you know, it would be a wonderful world if we could all agree on what would be on labels. And it should be a lot simpler for all the food manufacturers out there. And it actually would probably help a lot with controlling some food safety issues, because label changeovers are the most common cause of food recalls because of a failure to switch to the right label, depending on what the product is being made. So simplifying labels and the number of changeovers necessary would actually probably really help everyone. But yeah, and consistency from country to country too. You know, let's say you're a U.S. consumer, you're allergic to something, you go to a different country, they're not required to label it, and you eat a product thinking, oh, well, surely they would have it on there if it's got an allergen, but it may not. So having minimum criteria for what needs to be displayed, I think would be a nice thing to come to agreement on. Yeah.
This will be a nice project for GHI to pursue, and hopefully we will bring some, things on the agenda for our members. So thank you very much for these wonderful presentations and the knowledge that you share with us. Thank you, Carrie Allen, Vice President, Business Development and Strategy in the Food Industry Association in the United States, and Dr. Isabella Nambayo, Assistant Professor at Food Science and the Nutrition Department at Coventry University in the United Kingdom. Thank you for your excellent, engaging and informative presentation. Again, huge thanks to ICC for hosting our webinar, and our team, Dr. Nicola Stanley and Dr. Gerhard Schleining. Thank you for all our audience for your questions and great support. I really like that you find our webinars very informative, and just for these people from the audience that ask, the seminars, the webinars will be on the GHI website next week displayed, and also in our YouTube channel.